Hey everyone, this is Michael again, and welcome to the AEW Dynamite review. Dynamite tonight was from the Scotiabank Saddledome in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And Dynamite tonight, I thought it was a decent show, in my opinion. Tonight on Dynamite, it kicked off the final matches in the Owen Hart Cup tournament for the men and the women. So for the men, we have Bryan Danielson versus Hangman Page. We also had a Stampede Street fight where, hi guys, hi everybody, Chris Jericho took on Samoa Joe. We had a Global Glory four-way match to determine who will get a future shot at the International Championship. So it was Pac versus Kyle Fletcher versus Claudio Castagnoli versus Tomohiro Ishii. And the main event was the women's final match in the Owen Hart Cup tournament, Mariah May versus Will Nightingale. But overall, Dynamite tonight, it was a decent show, and the show flew by fast, in my opinion, because the Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page match, in my opinion, took up the whole first hour. But, like I said, overall, it was a decent show. But anyways, let's jump right into the review. Dynamite opened up tonight with the International Champion, Will Ospreay. Ospreay ended up making his way out, got a big pop from the crowd there in Calgary. So he got into the ring, he got on the mic, and he ended up addressing the crowd what happened last week on Dynamite, saying that he was appalled, but not surprised. Ospreay ended up going to say that he had heard rumors about MJF, that he was one of the most insecure men in all of professional wrestling. He ended up saying MJF proved these to be true when he attacked Danny Garcia last week on Dynamite. If you remember, last week on Dynamite, MJF ended up taking out Danny Garcia with the Dynamite Diamond Ring, busting him open. So Ospreay ended up saying that Danny Garcia is still at home now, with no feeling in his arms, and no idea when or if he is coming back to pro wrestling. Oh yes, Danny Garcia will be back. And Ospreay ended up saying, oh, MJF wants to blame the people. So Ospreay talked about how MJF is not having things go his way, including, he ended up mentioning the bidding war of 2024. When MJF, always wants to say, oh, it's going to be the bidding war of 2024. So Ospreay ended up saying, because of that, Tony Khan would rather spend money on someone who will elevate AEW instead of bringing it down. So Ospreay ended up talking about having more talent in, and a certain part of his body that MJF does in his entire body, before saying that he is jealous because Ospreay works hard for AEW, whereas the world champion, the former world champion MJF, only cares about himself. Ospreay ended up going to say that since joining AEW, he's had to clean up after someone else's mess. He ended up saying that he's finally found who he has had to clean up after. So Ospreay followed up saying the level of the devil is the ground floor, and he is top level. Ospreay ended up saying that he's not in England grieving. He's in Calgary looking for a fight. So Ospreay ended up calling out MJF. He was like, oh, if you want to fight, come on out. So MJF's music ended up hitting. MJF didn't come out, but he ended up appearing on the screen. and MJF was shown holding a glass of wine. So MJF ended up saying that no one deserves to be graced with his presence. He ended up going on to mention of all the men that he's beaten in AEW. MJF ended up calling Ospreay the flavor of the month, whereas he is the flavor of the millennium. So MJF ended up calling himself the flavor of the millennium here. He ended up claiming the fans will toss Ospreay aside like they tried to do to him. MJF ended up saying that he's not irreplaceable, unlike Ospreay, who will be replaced by the next flippy guy they call the best in the world. So MJF ended up asking if Ospreay wants to fight him tonight. But he ended up saying that he doesn't do it for free. So MJF then laid out a challenge for next week. And next week on Dynamite, it will be MJF versus Will Ospreay for the International Championship on Dynamite's 250th show. So Ospreay ended up accepting it, and there's your match for next week. And it should be a good match between Ospreay and MJF next week. Of course, Ospreay is going to retain the International Championship. No way I see MJF, beating Ospreay. But that was basically how the segment ended. But I thought this was a really good promo from Ospreay, just shooting down on MJF. And I thought MJF's promo that he delivered on Collision on Saturday, I thought that was, very good. It's the cocky-ish prick that we all know MJF is. So I'm really glad that, we got back the old MJF. I mean, he had a pretty decent run as a babyface, but MJF, when we think of him, he works more better as a heel. And I think everybody will agree with me on that. But I thought MJF's response to Ospreay, I thought that was, good. I thought it was very strong by MJF. So, like I said, I'm looking forward to the match next week. And then we had the first match of the night, which was the final match of the Men's Owen Hart Cup tournament. Bryan Danielson versus Hangman Adam Page. Jeff Jarrett was on the stage because he was the special enforcer, standing next to the Owen Hart Championship. So Bryan Danielson made his way out. Jeff Jarrett was shown standing beside the trophy and also the Owen Hart Championship belt, that goes to the winner of the tournament. So then Hangman Page ended up coming out. And as Page came out, he stared Jeff Jarrett down before heading to the ring. And the match got underway, which this was a very good match here. It took up, almost the first hour of Dynamite. I mean, these two went for a good amount of time. So the match ended up getting underway where Page ended up shoving Bryan towards the ropes, and Bryan ended up getting back to his feet, and he did a lockup on Page. So Page ended up sending Bryan down to the canvas. Bryan got back to his feet. He went for another lockup on Page. He ended up sending Page into the corner. Page ended up charging at Bryan for some stomps. Bryan ended up getting back up, and he ended up taking a hard chop from Page. And Bryan ended up escaping the corner. He caught Page with a single leg crab, and Page ended up getting to the bottom rope, so Bryan ended up having to release the single leg crab off of Page. So both men got back to their feet. Page ended up getting sent to the outside by Bryan. Bryan ended up taking Page down with a dive to the floor. Page ended up going back to the ring. Bryan ended up climbing up to the top rope, and he delivered a missile drop kick, which sent Page into the corner. Bryan was going to do a running boot to Page, but Page ended up cutting Bryan off. Page ended up taking Bryan down to the apron and slammed him into the turnbuckle. Bryan then ended up crashing out to the floor, and then Dynamite went to commercial. And during the picture-in-picture, we saw Page end up sending Bryan into the ring steps, and Page ended up slamming Bryan's head against the ring steps. So at this point, Bryan was busted open. He was bleeding profusely. He was favoring his neck, which, Bryan was selling the neck. So Page ended up bringing Bryan back to his feet and back into the ring. So as Dynamite came back from the commercial, Page was in control of the match. He had delivered some stomps onto Bryan. So both men were in the ring. They would trade strikes at each other. Page ended up locking a sleeper on Bryan. He ended up swinging Bryan around and dropped him to the canvas. Bryan headed to the corner, and Page ended up continuing to lay in some chops to wear Bryan down. Page ended up following up with some punches to Bryan's head. Bryan started firing back with some chops to Page. Bryan was then delivering a series of uppercuts to Page, which ended up getting stopped by him. And Bryan ended up catching Page with a cross arm breaker, and he transitioned that into the label lock on Page. Page got his foot on the ropes to force the break. Bryan then started laying in some kicks. Page ended up catching Bryan. He ended up lifting him up onto his shoulders and dropped Bryan down to the canvas with a back suplex. Page headed to the turnbuckle, but he was swept out by Bryan. Bryan ended up catching Page with a German suplex to send Page crashing down to the canvas. Bryan went up to the top. He was looking to go for a flying headbutt, but Page ended up evading it. He ended up sending Bryan up for a crossface. So Bryan ended up getting his foot on the rope to force a break, and Page was holding on as long as he could with the crossface locked in on Bryan. So then Dynamite went to commercial. So then, as Dynamite came back from commercial, we had Bryan land a series of elbows on Page. So Page ended up fighting back. He ended up pulling a turnbuckle cover off to slam Bryan's head into it and send him down to the canvas. Page ended up going for a moonsault, and Bryan ended up carrying out of that, and Page then connected with a tombstone pile driver to Bryan. He ended up going for the cover, to which Bryan kicked out. Bryan then rolled out of the ring. Page ended up going up to the top, but he was sent out to the floor by Bryan because Bryan ended up delivering a springboard senton to Page. So both guys ended up crashing out to the floor. Bryan started favoring his neck. So we had Page end up catching Bryan with a pile driver onto the floor. It looked like Bryan's head hit the floor from that pile driver by Page. So we had a medic and Jeff Jarrett ended up coming down to check on Bryan. Page rolled into the ring, and he ended up going after Bryan, once again. Jeff Jarrett tried to keep Page away from Bryan, and it caused Page to pie face Jeff Jarrett. And Page ended up going back into the ring. Jeff Jarrett was frustrated with Hangman pie facing him. So the ref started counting, and Bryan managed to get back into the ring as the ref counted to 9. And, with the pile driver that Page hit Bryan, Bryan's, the top of his head right here was bleeding as well. So Page ended up laying in some strikes to Bryan. He ended up pulling away at the protective tape that was on Bryan's back. But Bryan ended up evading Page, and he went for the Busaiku knee to Page. So both men were down, and both men were starting to fight to their feet. They were trading headbutts. Bryan ended up hitting a kick to Page to get back into the match. He ended up escaping a back suplex from Page, and Bryan ended up charging for another Busaiku knee, which that ended up hitting the ref. So the ref was taken out because of the Busaiku knee to, from Bryan, because Page ended up getting out of the way. So Page took his belt off, and he started whipping Bryan with the belt. Jeff Jarrett ended up going into the ring to intervene. Page started arguing with Jarrett, and he shoved Jarrett to the canvas. Jarrett got to his feet, and it was revealed that Jarrett was wearing a referee shirt underneath, his shirt. So Bryan ended up rolling up Page, and Page ended up kicking out. Bryan ended up going for the label lock, but Page countered out for a near fall, and we had Page end up delivering a buckshot lariat to Bryan. So Page ended up setting up for another buckshot lariat, but Bryan ended up catching Page with a roll-up, and Page ended up kicking out, and Page transitioned into another crossface on Bryan. Bryan tried to roll out, but Page ended up catching Bryan in the middle of the ring. So Jarrett was checking Bryan's arm because Bryan was fading fast because the crossface was still locked in. So Bryan kept his arm up as he ended up trying to counter out of the crossface, and Bryan ended up trapping Page's shoulders to the mat. And because of that, Bryan ended up winning. So Bryan is the men's Owen Hart tournament winner for this year. Post-match, Page was beside himself. He confronted Jeff Jarrett about the finish, and he left the ring. Martha Hart, Owen's widow, ended up joining Jeff Jarrett in the ring to present the trophy and the championship to Bryan. So, with the win here, Bryan gets a shot at Swerve Strickland for the World Championship at Wembley Stadium at All In. So that brought out Swerve Strickland. He came out to the ramp, and Dynamite went to commercial. But very good match this was between Bryan and Page here. Just good wrestling from the both of them. Back and forth. Very physical match it was. But really enjoyed it. So then as Dynamite came back from the commercial, Swerve Strickland was in the ring. Of course, with Prince Nana. And he ended up addressing what happened last week. He ended up congratulating Bryan Danielson on winning the Owen Hart Cup tournament to earn his shot at All In for the World Championship. So Swerve ended up talking about Bryan being on a downslide while he is still on top, while Swerve is still on top. He then turned his attention to the EVPs trying to offer him Reeboks, their own Reebok shoes, and a spot on their team for Blood and Guts. Swerve then ended up saying that he accepts a spot in the match and that he's going to be on Team AEW. So he ended up saying that he promises to make good on the second of two things Bryan cannot do this year. After beating Will Ospreay, he will go on to beat the Elite. So Swerve ended up challenging Okada. So he was like, where the world champion will show him how to really make it rain. He kept saying that he'll see Bryan at All In, where it will truly be Bryan's final countdown. So Swerve was like, whose house? The crowd responded, Swerve's house. So Swerve then dropped the mic, and he ended up getting out of the ring. And pretty much that was basically that. But overall, I thought this was a good segment here with Swerve. He's ready for Bryan. When the match comes at All In Wembley, it's going to be a very good match there. I thought it was good that Swerve ended up announcing that he will be participating in Blood and Guts, but on Team AEW. So Swerve is part of AEW, Team AEW in Blood and Guts. And then we had the Acclaimed. They were cutting a music video, calling out the Young Bucks. I thought this video was just very meh, in my opinion. It was a rap video. Just didn't care for it. And then we had a Stampede Street Fight. Samoa Joe versus, hi guys, hi everybody, Chris Jericho of the Learning Tree. God, what an awful gimmick. Absolutely awful. Samoa Joe made his way down to the ring first, and then out came Chris Jericho. He was accompanied by Brian Keith. So they headed to the ring, and I thought this Stampede Street Fight was okay. It wasn't great or perfect by any means. But we had the match end up getting on the way where Joe ended up removing Jericho's hat, and he laid into Jericho. He sent Jericho into the corner. He was delivering some hard rights to Jericho. Joe then sent Jericho into the opposite corner for a running kick, and Joe followed that up with some more punches to Jericho. Brian Keith tried to get involved, and it led to Joe going after Brian Keith on the outside. He upset Brian Keith into the crowd, and then he went to the apron, and he ended up getting intercepted by, Big Bill and Brian Keith. So Jericho then grabbed a chair. He ended up sending Joe back into the ring, and he pulled out a bag from under the ring. And it wasn't thumbtacks that was in the bag. So Jericho dumped out what was in the bag, and they were horseshoes. So Jericho ended up going for a back suplex to Samoa Joe, but Joe ended up fighting back with some elbows, and he delivered a knee to Jericho. Jericho tried to catch Joe with a bulldog, but Joe ended up catching Jericho, and Joe slammed Jericho onto the pile of horseshoes. So Jericho ended up managing to get back into the match. He ended up low blowing Joe, and then he locked in the walls of Jericho, and then Dynamite went to commercial, and during the picture-in-picture, Joe was trying to get to the bottom rope for Jericho to break up the walls because Joe was still locked in the walls of Jericho, during the picture-in-picture. But as soon as Dynamite came back, Joe ended up turning his body around. He ended up cracking Jericho in the head with the horseshoe to break up the walls of Jericho. So Joe ended up getting to his feet. He sent Jericho into the corner, but we had Jericho end up countering out of a muscle buster. He ended up sending Joe to the outside. He then waved to the crowd. Hi guys, hope you all like what I'm doing to Joe. And then he ended up running toward Joe, and Joe ended up evading Jericho. He ended up sending him into the crowd, and they ended up going through the crowd, brawling up the stairs. So they ended up making their way through the stands. Joe then slammed a bag of popcorn against Jericho. And then they made their way backstage, and they ended up in the coffee area. Jericho threw a hot cup of coffee at Joe, to which Joe ended up responding with a coquina clutch locked in on Jericho. But lo and behold, Big Bill ended up coming in with a steel chair. He ended up cracking the steel chair against Samoa Joe's back. Brian Keith ended up coming in there. He started beating Joe down. Jericho ended up using the belt that he got from Martha Hart, to which he posted on his social media. So he used the belt. So Big Bill and Brian Keith ended up sending Joe up on a pallet that was being supported by a forklift. Jericho then got into the forklift. He operated the forklift, and he drove the forklift with Joe being on a pallet. He drove Joe into a nearby drywall. So officials end up rushing to check in on Joe, and get the doctor there. declared that Samoa Joe cannot continue the match. So the bell ended up ringing. So Jericho won the match by ref stoppage. So Joe was just, laid out there. And pretty much that was basically that. But overall, the match was okay, but nothing great, nothing perfect here. And then as Dynamite came back from commercial, Samoa Joe was being brought into an ambulance, and the ambulance ended up taking off, and then the camera panned to Jericho, Big Bill, and Brian Keith there. Jericho was waving goodbye. He was like, "Bye, Joe." And pretty much that was that. God, Learning Tree is such an awful group. Absolutely awful. Get this shit off my TV. Then we had a Global Glory 4-way match where the winner will get a future shot at the International Championship. So it was Claudio Castagnoli versus Kyle Fletcher versus Pac versus Tomohiro Ishii. And this was a fun match here. Really liked this match. Ishii and Claudio end up going at it with some forearm strikes. Fletcher ended up getting involved, and he ended up getting dropped to the canvas. So Fletcher ended up getting sent outside. Claudio and Tomohiro Ishii started trading strikes again. Claudio ended up being taken down with a shoulder tackle. Pac ended up getting involved. He ended up delivering a missile drop kick. Ishii left the ring, and Kyle Fletcher and Pac were going at it. You also had Don Callis on commentary. And, tonight we had also, Nigel McGuinness on commentary, which I like Nigel McGuinness on commentary. He's a great heel commentator. So Claudio was looking to go for a giant swing on Pac, but Kyle Fletcher ended up intercepting. So all four guys started going at it. Claudio caught Ishii with a gut-wrench suplex. Ishii left the ring, and he was then met by both Kyle Fletcher and Pac. Claudio ended up delivering a dive on Fletcher, Pac, and Ishii. Then as Dynamite came back from the commercial, all four men were in the ring, and Ishii ended up laying in some forearms on Castagnoli and also Pac and Fletcher. So Pac ended up catching Fletcher with a Poison Rana, but he was dropped with an uppercut by Claudio. Claudio ended up getting taken down by Fletcher. So Ishii ended up going up to the top. He was taken out by Claudio. He ended up sending Fletcher on a swing, and he locked in the sharpshooter on Fletcher, which got a big pop from the crowd there in Calgary. Pac ended up going up to the top. He delivered an elbow on Fletcher, and then Pac ended up locking in the brutalizer on Fletcher. Ishii ended up forcing Claudio to break the sharpshooter with some punches. So Ishii ended up laying out Claudio, and he ended up laying Pac out with a lariat to break the hold on Fletcher. So in the end, Pac ended up delivering the Black Arrow on Fletcher. He then ended up doing the brutalizer on Fletcher, and he ended up forcing Fletcher to tap out, and before Claudio could break it up. So Pac ended up winning the match. Pac gets a future shot at the International Championship. Claudio was confused. He was shaking his head at what happened. So post-match, Pac got on the mic. He ended up addressing the promises that he made since returning to AEW in March. Pac ended up saying that he's made some humiliating failures, but this is all in season, and he will not be denied his Wembley moment. He ended up saying, "Let tonight stand as a lie in the sand, because Pac will be back." And pretty much that was basically what Pac had to say. But overall, I thought this was a fun match here. And I really like that Pac is getting an opportunity, to get a future shot at the International Championship. But I'm very curious to see where, things go. head into All In here. So then we saw Renee Paquette. Renee Paquette was backstage. She ended up getting pushed aside by Hangman Page because Renee was going to follow up about Samoa Joe. And, since Hangman ended up pushing Renee aside, Renee ended up leading Hangman to try and get a word. But Page ended up banging on the door of the EVPs. So Okada came out. He was like, what do you want? So we had the Bucks end up coming out, and it led Page to say that he will do it. So that was basically that. And then we have Mercedes Moné, the CEO, the double champion, the TBS champion, and New Japan Strong Women's World Champion. So she headed to the ring to celebrate becoming a double champion at Double or Nothing. She got on the mic, and she kept saying that she wants to address the past, present, and future, because she is the past, present, and future. Mercedes ended up saying that she is the best there was, the best there is, and the best there ever will be. Of course, quoting Bret Hart, which that got boos from the crowd there. So Mercedes ended up saying that she wants to raise a toast to the CEO. And she had security out there because, she wanted this celebration to not go, wrong, or somebody coming out and disrupting it. But that was a fail because Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, made her way out to interrupt the celebration. So we had Britt Baker ended up taking out the security, and she ended up making a beeline through the stage and to the ring. And as soon as Britt Baker got into the ring, Mercedes ended up getting out of the ring, wanting nothing to do with Britt Baker. And that was basically that. But overall, I thought this was a very boring segment here, in my opinion. But the match with Britt Baker and Mercedes Moné, which will possibly happen at All In, I think that's going to be a very good match there. Looking forward to it. It's going to be probably for the TBS Championship. And then, as Dynamite came back from the commercial, we saw Darby Allin. He was beating up on Brandon Cutler backstage. So Darby Allin looked at the camera, and he called out Jack Perry for next week's Dynamite. So I guess next week we're going to be getting Darby Allin versus Jack Perry, maybe. We'll see where that goes for next week. Main event, Will Nightingale versus Mariah May. This is the final match in the Women's Owen Hart Cup tournament. And this was a good match here. Mariah May ended up coming out first. Of course, she was accompanied by Timeless, Toni Storm, and Luther. So then Will Nightingale then made her way out to the ring. I really like that both Mariah May and Toni Storm were honoring Owen, because of their gear that they were wearing. Thought that was pretty cool. Paying honor to Owen. So the match started off with Mariah May. She caught Will Nightingale with a wrist lock. Willow countered out of the wrist lock. Mariah May ended up getting a waist lock to Will Nightingale. So both women started trading holds. Mariah May ended up getting trapped in the full Nelson from Will Nightingale. Will then ended up going for a gut wrench powerbomb. And we had Mariah May end up forcing a break. So Mariah May ended up getting sent to the corner. And we had Will Nightingale end up delivering a chop to Mariah May. And Will Nightingale ended up following up by dropping Mariah May down to the canvas. Mariah May started fighting back, and she ended up delivering a drop kick to Nightingale. Willow was sent to the corner. Mariah May ended up going for a head scissors, sending Nightingale into the ropes. So we had Willow end up catching Mariah May with a spin side slam. She ended up going for the cover, and Mariah May ended up kicking out. And that was followed up by a crossbody. So Nightingale ended up sending Mariah May to the outside, and she had followed up with a senton on Mariah May. And then Dynamite went to commercial. Then when Dynamite came back from the commercial, Mariah May ended up dropping Nightingale down to the canvas, and she ended up going for the cover, and Nightingale ended up kicking out. Nightingale started fighting back. She delivered a kick to Mariah May. So Willow ended up sending Mariah May into the ropes for a spine buster. She ended up going for the cover, to which Mariah May ended up kicking out. So Willow was, getting the Calgary crowd all fired up as she set up for a sharpshooter to Mariah May, but Mariah ended up managing to escape out of the sharpshooter, and she ended up catching Nightingale with a suplex. Willow ended up getting to the corner. Mariah May ended up hitting an uppercut to Will Nightingale, but Mariah was sent to the corner. So we had later on someone in a hoodie went after Will Nightingale, as Will Nightingale tried to get up, because we had both Mariah May and Will Nightingale were taken out with a big headbutt. So we had Toni Storm distracting the ref, and Kris Statlander ended up delivering a big boot to Will Nightingale. And of course, we realized who was, in the hoodie, and it was Stokely Hathaway. So Stokely Hathaway and Will Nightingale end up escaping up the ramp. Mariah May ended up going for the cover, and Willow ended up kicking out. Mariah May then ended up catching Willow, and we had Mariah May end up going for the cover, and Willow ended up kicking out. Willow then ended up dropping Mariah May with a lariat. So we had Will Nightingale end up hitting a cannonball as Mariah May was in the corner. So Mariah May ended up countering out of a Death Valley driver, keeping Nightingale down. So she ended up going for the cover, and there you go. Mariah May ended up winning the Women's Owen Hart Cup tournament for this year. And so now Mariah May will be facing Toni Storm for the Women's World Championship at All In Wembley. So post-match, Mariah May and Will Nightingale end up shaking hands. Nightingale left the ring. Mariah May celebrated with Toni Storm. They head up the ramp toward the trophy and the championship belt. So Mariah May ended up attacking Toni Storm. She used the championship belt to attack Toni Storm. So Mariah May ended up turning the heel here. So Mariah May ended up whipping the belt against Toni Storm, and we saw Mariah May end up sending Luther flying through a table off the stage. She ended up going back to work on Toni Storm. She ended up attacking Toni Storm with her heel, and Mariah May left Toni Storm bloodied. Toni Storm was very bloodied up, bleeding profusely. So on the screen, it showed the matchup for All In. Mariah May versus Toni Storm for the Women's World Championship at All In. So then we saw, Mariah May standing tall over her former mentor in Toni Storm. And that was how Dynamite went off the air. But overall, I thought this was a good match between Mariah May and Will Nightingale in the final of the Owen Hart Cup tournament. Obviously, we knew that Mariah May was going to win the match. I called it and said Mariah May was going to win the whole tournament, which I am happy about. And this is going to be one hell of a match in Wembley at All In, with Mariah May and Toni Storm here. I really like the attack on Toni Storm from Mariah May, blowing her up. But I'm looking forward to it. Two, English woman going at it in their home country. But overall, Dynamite tonight, decent show it was. But anyways, that's it for the Dynamite review. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed this review. Definitely give the video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. And I won't be doing a SmackDown review on Friday. So, until the next video, I'll see you all later.